So Pierre Poilievre has taped an episode with Joe Rogan, which is, kind of the top podcaster in the United States, known for, maybe some controversial views on some issues. He endorsed President Donald Trump in the last election, though he's kind of soured on him a little bit in recent weeks, especially in wake of the conflict in the Middle East and what's happened with Iran. He was, Joe Rogan being someone who was kind of an isolationist, if you will. But, Poilievre has gone on. They just taped the episode today, we're told. It wrapped up about half an hour ago. The episode's going to drop probably in the next day or two. So this is a huge platform for Mr. Poilievre. It's arguably, the most listened to podcast in the world, just an amazingly large audience. And essentially it's being spun to us as this is Pierre making the case for Canada down south, delivering on a show that has the biggest audience in the world. Do you think that that's a smart move for Poilievre? I mean, it's very bold for him to go on a podcast like that has been a source of controversy. Cameron, do you think it's smart politics?
We'll have to hear what he actually said in that interview before determining whether it was smart politics or not. The move itself, I'm going to hold my breath. I'm not going to say it's necessarily bold or clever, because there's a good chance that he's just talking to a lot of people. If we think about Canadians who might be listening to that podcast, who are already supportive of him or already on side. I think what he needs to do is figure out why he has not managed to connect with a broad enough coalition of Canadians who are outside of his traditional realm of support and convince them that he's a viable leader for this country at this moment of great chaos and disruption.
Tim,
and
sorry. Keep going.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cameron. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I'm like all for speaking to bigger audiences and non-traditional audiences and people that you don't necessarily tend to speak to. I think that's really smart, and all politicians have to, especially today, especially in the past few years, have to get outside of their bubbles. I don't think that's likely what he's doing here. And I think he has a much bigger question about his leadership and where the Conservative Party can go as Mark Carney coalesces the ever-growing coalition of people.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, there's a risk of being associated with someone like Rogan, who is a vaccine skeptic, someone who endorsed Trump.
Ivermectin, yeah, worked great. Didn't it?
Some controversial opinions on things. So, just doing the show means that in some way you are tied to him, although, of course, they have different views on things. But it is a way to appeal to members of the Conservative base, right, who may be feeling a bit disaffected by looking at some of these polling numbers and seeing that they're not riding as high as they once were, right? It's a way to get young men in particular maybe dialed in, and that's the principal audience for that podcast. It's a way to kind of show he's got some pep in his step. Hey, I landed an interview with the biggest podcaster in the world. I mean, it's really a double-edged sword, potentially. Maybe that's the only answer here, but what do you make of this?
Well, and he's not the first Canadian leader of the current group that used a U.S. platform to try an amplification effect. I mean, the Prime Minister, before he became the Prime Minister, went on Jon Stewart, and that apparently went very well for him. Look, it's not without risk, as Cam is alluding to. I think it's a risk a managed risk that his team feels he can take. I think it will be really important to see what he says and how he says it. I think the danger for an opposition leader always when they visit a foreign country, particularly the United States, and they appear on a U.S. platform at a time when we are projecting an image of national unity when it relates to the biggest issues in the world, whether it be how we deal with Trump or the Iran war. Is he pushed into a different position that creates him some domestic difficulties? Is he Jamil Javani'd? Now, I think he's too smart to be Jamil Javani'd, but that's something they'll have to manage. Yeah, there'll be some criticism that he was there, but I think it's what comes out of his mouth that will be more important than him being on it. He can deal with the criticism. They've already determined that is acceptable. So, yeah, manage risk, see where it goes.
Jordan, too, the risk is that these podcasts are long.
Yeah.
Right? Like the Joe Rogan ones are like 3-4 hours sometimes, right? And you're just spitballing the whole time, right? It's not like there's not really a script. You kind of go off on different tangents. He's asking you about a whole bunch of different things. And that's where Poilievre has actually gotten in trouble in the past, right? I mean, if you remember, he did that podcast here where he was talking about the RCMP leadership being despicable, essentially accusing them of covering up for Justin Trudeau. Some things that were not, necessarily what we hear him say to members of the parliamentary press gallery, right? So that's perhaps the biggest risk, maybe, is just the length of the conversation and the chance to maybe step in it along the way.
Yeah, it's certainly a risk. And I think that one of the challenges of the podcast format for politicians is the length, and also they're informal, right? So there's a sense of being comfortable. And for Poilievre, he has in the past had problems when he feels like he's in the room with a fellow traveler and they're talking about things that are appealing to both of them, sort of forgetting how a wider audience might hear that. And you alluded to the example where he got into trouble about questioning the RCMP, for example. So I think it depends a great deal on what he says in the podcast, but Tim has laid out the biggest risk, I think, very clearly, which is that right now, when you're going to the United States, it's crucial that any politician, regardless of stripe, makes very clear that they're advocating for Canada. And this is something that Poilievre has really struggled with in the past, is striking the balance of being domestically critical of Prime Minister Carney and the government, but not seeming to cheer on President Trump in his attacks on the Canadian economy. So we'll have to see if he's able to maintain that through the podcast. I imagine that his team is quite alert to these risks, and this would have been a huge part of the conversation in preparation for the show. And it's really difficult to imagine almost any politician turning down a platform with that kind of reach.
I mean, there was criticism of Kamala Harris, right? That she didn't necessarily make it happen, although there's some dispute over whether she was accommodating enough for her, to do this show, because they have to go all the way to Austin, Texas, which is not necessarily like a big stop for a lot of politicians in the United States. Texas is not necessarily a swing state, although they're seeing some movement in the polls. But, there was even some talk that Kamala Harris should have done this podcast, despite some of his controversial views, despite hit the rightward bent of his politics, because of the size of the audience and because of its ability to appeal to people who may be on the fence politically. Sherelle, final thoughts to you on polls, on Joe Rogan, on Poilievre. Take it wherever you want.
Well, I think the idea, as everybody said, the platform of the Joe Rogan podcast, it's undeniable. And I would say a lot of the people who listen are susceptible to being swayed. So the idea of being able to speak to that audience, because what is going to change the President Trump's mind, has to come from within America. It's not going to, nothing that any Canadian can say, nothing that anybody from outside of the White House or outside of his own head can say is really going to sway him. But it is most likely to come from within the bounds of the United States. So if the people of the United States are the ones listening to somebody talk about Canada in a friendly light, that's why we would see Premier Doug Ford and others talk to Fox News. Yeah. Those are the types of conversations that they're listening to, and those are the voices that could eventually break through, if not to the president, then to their own state lawmakers and those who would eventually have to be the ones to have to carry out the president's agenda.
My producer Tyler just reminded me that actually Joe Rogan in May 2025 expressed frustration that Poilievre would not come on his show because he had invited him to appear in the past. And at the time, Rogan was told, and this is what he relayed to his audience, that Poilievre and his team deemed it too problematic or whatever. So, interesting. So it was too problematic now. They're like, hey, let's just give it a shot.